Today, we're tackling something pretty intense. We're going behind the scenes, really deep into Jim Caviezel's experience playing Jesus in The Passion of the Christ.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was, well, famously demanding. The sources we looked at really get into how it was more than just a tough acting job. It sounds like it was this incredibly personal, almost spiritual trial for him. So our mission here for you listening is to unpack these sources. They focus right in on Caviezel on faith and the passion's spiritual cost.
Mm-hmm.
We want to try and understand, what was the real price? Spiritually, physically, what did that performance actually cost him?
Exactly. And for you, the listener, trying to get a handle on this, it's more than just movie facts. It's really about seeing how extreme commitment, physically, mentally, how that kind of deep dive into a subject can pull out these universal truths about, well, suffering, endurance. When the performance and the actual pain start to blur, that's when the lessons really go beyond just the movie set. And that's where it gets genuinely fascinating.
Okay, so let's dive into that core conflict our sources keep mentioning. This idea of a duality for Caviezel on set. His pain or faith. Not pain and faith, but pain or faith. Like a constant choice. What does that specific wording, that duality, suggest about what he was going through?
Well, it tells you right away that the struggle wasn't just about, dealing with difficult circumstances like bad weather or physical discomfort. The phrase spiritual cost itself suggests something deeper, doesn't it? More internalized, like a kind of trauma. It implies this constant cognitive battle. If he didn't consciously, actively choose to lean on his faith, the sheer physical agony he was portraying and feeling to some extent would just overwhelm him. It would shut down his ability to stay in character internally. So the performance itself, it seems, demanded this active spiritual practice just to counterbalance the physical reality. His body was screaming, essentially.
And that physical reality, it sounds brutal. The sources don't shy away from the details. It goes way beyond just being uncomfortable on set. We hear about harsh weather, but just how harsh are we talking?
Well, the reports mention freezing conditions, real danger of hypothermia, especially during those scenes carrying the cross. And we also know he dislocated his shoulder. Actually dislocated it, carrying that huge prop cross.
Wow.
Yeah. Even with movie magic, he was lugging heavy timber, falling repeatedly. It wasn't all fake, and that repetition, that authentic physical stress, plus let's not forget, the sources confirm he was accidentally whipped for real twice.
Twice, leaving actual scars.
Leaving deep scars, yes. That kind of thing requires just monumental resilience mentally and physically.
That detail is just staggering. So he wasn't just acting hurt, he was genuinely physically suffering through parts of this. Repeatedly.
Exactly. And that's why documenting these physical things is so important. It grounds the whole spiritual discussion in something concrete, something real. If it was just, he was a bit cold, then talking about spiritual sacrifice might sound a little abstract, academic. But because the sources confirm this level of genuine agony, it elevates the conversation. It's not just acting technique anymore. It becomes about a survival mechanism. Yeah. He literally had to use his faith, it seems, to cope with the immediate physical demands of the role.
Okay, so let's shift a bit. How does this incredible cost, this suffering, translate into something meaningful for us, for the audience? Our sources really try to connect Caviezel's specific experiences, his own words, to these broader universal spiritual lessons. How does one person's very specific, isolated struggle on a film set unlock something universal?
That's a great question. I think the value isn't necessarily in discovering some brand new universal truth, perhaps. It's more in how that truth gets articulated when someone is pushed to their absolute limit. Physical pain, deep grief, whatever it is, the coping mechanisms, the insights people find in those extreme moments, they often cut through all the cultural layers. The struggle itself becomes this raw metaphor. For instance, the surface suggests that for Caviezel, maybe the big realization wasn't directly about the historical crucifixion itself, but about the immediate gut-level need for reliance on the crew, on his faith, on his community, whatever it was. That's a pretty universal lesson, right? Interdependence when you're under extreme pressure.
That really does shift the focus. Less theology, more raw humanity. And speaking of active reliance, the sources mention his spiritual discipline during filming, specifically praying between takes. That level of constant spiritual immersion, it's hard to even imagine.
Yeah, that detail, praying between takes, it's like a little window into his whole process, isn't it? It signals there wasn't really any off time for him. Most actors, they break character, grab a coffee, check their phone.
Right. Decompress.
Exactly. But for him, it sounds like the spiritual recentering was the break. It reinforces that idea that staying in that internal character space, was maybe the only way he could manage the external physical reality. If he disconnected, even for 5 minutes, maybe the sheer physical misery would have made it impossible to get back to that depth.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit more. The analysis we're discussing, it really leans heavily on Caviezel's real statements from his interviews, his own words. Why is using his authentic voice, his actual quotes, so essential for this kind of analysis to feel profound? Couldn't someone just say, well, this is just really intense method acting and he's describing it in spiritual terms?
That's a fair point, a fair challenge, but I think the difference comes down to emotional authority. If we only had, say, third-party accounts, what the director saw, what other actors thought, then yeah, it stays a bit subjective. Is he method acting? Is he having a genuine spiritual experience? We're just guessing. But when you use Caviezel's own words, his description of that duality, pain or faith, where he himself frames it as this test, that gives the analysis its emotional weight. It's undeniable because it's his stated experience, his framing. It's what allows the discussion to become, as the sources put it, emotional, spiritual, and deeply moving. We're engaging with his articulated reality, not just speculating. And connecting that to the bigger picture, using his actual words kind of certifies the emotional truth of that struggle for the listener, for you. It makes sure the conversation goes beyond just film critique, talking about lighting or camera work.
Right.
It pushes it into an analysis of conviction, of endurance. His words become the bridge, carrying those potential universal lessons.
So if we pull all this together, what we have is this really unique mix, right? There's the extreme documented physical suffering. There are these sustained spiritual practices, like the praying. And then there are the candid reflections, his own words, about the internal battle. It's almost like a case study in extreme commitment.
It really is. And that brings us to the key point for you, the listener. Why does an actor's spiritual cost even matter to us? It's an important question to ask. I think it matters because it highlights the sheer level of transformative immersion sometimes needed for art to achieve total authenticity. It sort of reveals that to truly embody these huge peaks of human experience, extreme suffering, profound faith, an actor might need to go beyond simulation. They might need to actually integrate that reality somehow.
So the performance stops being just a craft and becomes something more like a testimony, an experience lived through.
Precisely. And that level of deep integration, that necessity, it tells us something vital about the subject matter itself. It confirms, in a way, that portraying this particular story demanded a spiritual expenditure, not just a physical one. And for us, for you listening, analyzing this spiritual cost gives us a kind of shortcut. It helps us grasp the incredible depth of conviction, the sheer suffering that went into creating that uniquely raw performance without having to sift through everything ourselves. We can understand the intensity of his internal fight by looking at these key moments the sources highlight.
This has been, well, definitely a deep dive. We've gone past just the surface story. We've explored that stark duality of pain versus faith he described. We've looked at the universal lessons that can come from such an intense struggle, like that idea of reliance. And we've seen how crucial it was that both the physical hardships and the spiritual practices were documented, often in his own words. Thank you really for joining us on this exploration. It's been quite something to unpack.
And maybe here's a final thought for you to take away and just sort of mull over. If an actor embodying a story requires such an immense, documented spiritual cost, this level of physical and mental commitment, what does that suggest about the inherent weight, the human cost, and maybe the unavoidable depth of the original story itself that they're trying to represent? Something to ponder.